Hello and welcome. My name is Vineet Malhotra and you are watching a World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of today. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Washington and Beijing reached a preliminary trade consensus in Kuala Lumpur ahead of next week's Trump-Xi meeting. Talks covered soybean purchases, fentanyl cooperation and a possible deferral of China's rare earth export limits. The United States and Vietnam have reached a framework for a reciprocal, fair and balanced trade deal that will give exporters unprecedented market access. Under the agreement, the U.S. will keep a 20% tariff on Vietnamese goods while identifying select products eligible for zero tariffs. Well, the leaders of Thailand and Cambodia have signed an enhanced ceasefire deal in Kuala Lumpur in the presence of U.S. President Donald Trump, formally ending their deadly border conflict. The agreement builds on a July truce brokered after Trump urged both sides to halt fighting. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Israel will act independently in defending itself in Gaza and Lebanon, despite recent ceasefires. He emphasized that the country does not seek approval from any foreign power and will control its own security decisions. Well, the French police have arrested two suspects after thieves stole crown jewels worth 88 million euros from the Louvre in a daylight raid. One man was detained at Charles de Gaulle Airport while trying to flee, as officials admit security failures left France with a terrible image. The Kremlin says Russia will respond forcefully to any strikes deep inside its territory, with spokesman Dmitry Peskov quoting President Vladimir Putin's warning of an overwhelming reaction. Putin insists Moscow will never bow to pressure from the United States or any foreign power. President Vladimir Putin said that Russia has successfully tested its nuclear-powered Borovetsnik cruise missile, claiming it can evade any defense system, and the missile flew 14,000 kilometers over 15 hours during the October 21st test, according to Russia's top general Valery Gerasimov. Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces say that they have seized the army's main headquarters in Al-Fashir, the military's last stronghold in Darfur. The army has not yet commented on the claim, which marks a major escalation in the year-long power struggle. All right, well, the trade talks between Washington and Beijing reached a preliminary trade consensus in Kuala Lumpur, clearing the way for President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping to finalize a deal next week. This statement was reiterated by the Chinese trade negotiator Li Chenggang. Let's listen in.
经过一天多的非常紧张的讨论，中美双方就上述这些议题建设性的探讨了一些妥善处理双方关注的方案，形成了初步共识。双方就此进行了建设性的探讨。美方表达立场是强硬的，中方维护利益是坚定。
All right, Bessent further said that China is ready to make a trade deal, with both sides set to discuss substantial Chinese purchases of U.S. soybeans, cooperation to tackle the U.S. fentanyl crisis, and ways to balance trade while avoiding new 100% tariffs on Chinese goods. He added that Trump and Xi will decide on deferring China's rare earth export restrictions, a major sticking point in the talks. China's Vice Premier He Lifeng, on the other hand, said that the two sides should address each other's concerns through equal dialogue, implement the consensus reached, and meet each other halfway. All right, Dr. Jayant Mena, Senior Fellow at ICEAS, is joining us at this point in time. He's in Singapore. Professor, appreciate you being here with us. Well, the statement that I read out in my last monologue was that both the sides have to meet each other midway. But with Donald Trump, do you think that really is a possibility? For him, so far it's all or nothing. Do you think that China and the United States will be able to mediate some sort of a deal or some sort of a agreement which Donald Trump is also going to be happy about?
I think we've heard a lot of toing and froing so far as part of the dance before they actually come to the table and thrash out a deal. I think the time has come now for all of the drama to stop and to actually get on with the business of doing a deal. The current state of play is untenable for both sides. And it's been the US actually that's been provoking China and then getting very upset when China responds in a measured way. All that needs to stop now, and I think participants on both sides must take seriously a deal being negotiated very quickly, not only in the interest of their own countries, but also to sustain global growth, as these are the two biggest nations in the world.
Right, and Professor, there's also, right now we're talking about trade, but the Americans have been more than eager to support Taiwan, which has been, a major brooding point between the Americans and the Chinese. Do you think that is something that may also, perhaps not at the face of it, but behind closed doors, be a problem that China may want to hash out with the United States?
I think this is a highly sensitive issue for China, more so than it is an interest for the US. So I don't know what happens behind closed doors. It could well be raised, but I think there's so many economic issues, and I know that Trump has been trying to, use economic tools, or his tariffs in particular, to address all kinds of security and non-economic issues. But I don't think those two things should be mixed as far as possible. Of course, in the real world of geopolitics, they come together. But as far as possible, I think we should focus on trade issues using trade instruments and non-trade issues using the appropriate instruments separately. But to come back to your question, I think it might well be raised, and maybe this administration could be more likely to concede than the previous one.
All right, so stay with us. Well, in a major development, the US and Malaysia have agreed on a rare earth minerals deal, but Malaysia's trade minister has said that a new rare earths agreement is not exclusive to the United States. The deal allows Malaysia to work with multiple countries. He also highlighted that Malaysia has specific exemptions on exports. These include palm oil, rubber, cacao, and aerospace equipment. Officials stressed that these exemptions are part of Malaysia's broader trade strategy. The country aims to protect key industries while engaging in global trade partnerships. On the other hand, the United States and Vietnam are set to finalize a major trade agreement in the coming weeks, marking a new phase in economic ties between Washington and Hanoi. The deal will keep a 20% tariff on most Vietnamese goods, but remove duties on selected products that will be decided later. In return, Vietnam has agreed to grant preferential access to American exports and address long-standing non-tariff barriers, including U.S. motor vehicles, medical devices, and pharmaceuticals. All right, Dr. Jayant Menon, still with us on the broadcast. Dr. Menon, rare earth minerals, has it become, more of a fad these days? Because I remember Asim Munir and Shahbaz Sharif also, carrying this briefcase into the White House and trying to tell the American president that how, they could trade in these rare minerals and how Pakistan could be best buddies with the Americans. How do you explain this surge in rare minerals, being used to lure the Americans at this point in time, especially in the face of these tariff wars?
Well, it's become, weaponized, if you like, after China responded to long-standing U.S. restrictions on how their companies can export chips, especially the super chips to the U.S. When they responded in kind in imposing the same controls on Chinese firms exporting rare earths and magnets. So when that happened, suddenly the premium on having alternative sources of rare earth increased sharply. And so these countries, quite understandably, have been leveraging on the situation and using, wherever it's available, those rare earths to negotiate a better deal with the U.S. And it's you already explained how it's come into the Malaysian agreement. In fact, any country that has significant deposits of the various rare earths. Malaysia has non-radioactive versions of the rare earths in some abundance. They will be using them to try and cut a better deal because the headline reciprocal tariff can be reduced to zero on an exemptions list. And that's what they're pursuing. And as you said, Malaysia has already got it for some of its agricultural products, palm oil, cocoa, and a few other items as well.
Fair enough, sir. Dr. Menon, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Well, the 47th ASEAN Summit kicked off in Kuala Lumpur. Japan's new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has attended the ASEAN Summit on a first foreign trip since taking office earlier this week. Takaichi met leaders of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations to discuss regional cooperation. She focused on promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific and strengthening ties with ASEAN countries across technology, trade and supply chains. The Japanese leader also joined a Japan-led international conference on carbon neutrality and economic growth. She held bilateral talks with the Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, who is the current ASEAN chair. Takaichi is scheduled to meet US President Donald Trump in Tokyo next week and will then travel to South Korea for the APEC leaders meeting. Let's listen into what the Japanese Prime Minister had to say.
It is an honor for me to meet you as leaders on my first foreign visit as Prime Minister of Japan. Japan and ASEAN have built a relationship as trusted partners with heart-to-heart connections through long-standing cooperation in a wide range of areas. Japan advocates for free and open Indo-Pacific and consistently support the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific.
Meanwhile, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi virtually addressed the ASEAN Summit, highlighting the theme inclusivity and sustainability. Prime Minister Modi announced 2026 as the year of ASEAN-India maritime cooperation and stressed growing collaboration in education, tourism, science, health, green energy and cybersecurity. He reaffirmed India's strong partnership with ASEAN, calling this the century of India and ASEAN countries, and expressed confidence in achieving ASEAN Community Vision 2045 and Viksit Bharat 2047. Let's listen in to what the Indian Prime Minister had to say.
इस वर्ष की आसियान समिट की थीम है इंक्लूसिविटी एंड सस्टेनेबिलिटी और ये थीम हमारे साझा प्रयासों में स्पष्ट दिखती है, चाहे वो डिजिटल इंक्लूजन हो या फिर मौजूदा वैश्विक चुनौतियों के बीच फूड सिक्योरिटी और रिजिलिएंट सप्लाई चेन सुनिश्चित करना। भारत इन प्राथमिकताओं का पूर्ण समर्थन करता है और इस दिशा में साथ आगे बढ़ने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है। फ्रेंड्स, भारत हर आपदा में अपने आसियान मित्रों के साथ मजबूती से खड़ा रहा है।
All right, Ross Feingold, political analyst, is joining us from Taipei in Taiwan at this point in time. Ross, always a pleasure having you and speaking with you. Well, you know, for the most part, ASEAN has been a unit or a forum, which has been projected as a conglomeration and coming together of countries that have been ready to take on China for a number of reasons, which I'm sure, Ross, you're familiar with. Of course, the South China Sea and the, over masculine aggression in some parts of these ASEAN countries has also been an irritant. For the first time, perhaps you and I can agree that cooperation, which talks about cybersecurity, which talks about trade, which talks about economy and people-to-people connection, is being celebrated here. Do you think that the momentum that the ASEAN countries had been carrying on for the last few years is shifting, so to speak?
The reality is, any kind of momentum to cooperate on different issues, whether that's security and specifically the South China Sea, or on trade or other initiatives, it's often subject to changes in the political environment. And I don't necessarily mean the international or multilateral political environment, but the reality is that leadership in many of these countries has changed in recent years, sometimes rapidly. We're talking about the new Japanese Prime Minister's attendance at the ASEAN Summit, and then she'll be meeting with President Trump in Japan, and then she'll be going to APEC. But she's the 5th Prime Minister in 5 years. Thailand has changed its leadership multiple times in recent years. Malaysia has changed its leadership multiple times in recent years. Indonesia has a new president. The president of the Philippines is midway through his term, but he's limited by constitution to only 1 term. So it makes it difficult for there to be continuity. And that doesn't apply to all the countries in Southeast Asia, but it does apply to a number of them. And some of these leaders are looking at the other leaders and saying, well, I don't know if he or she is going to be around in a few years, so what's the point of making any commitments?
Ross, stay with us. In fact, the ASEAN Summit in Kuala Lumpur continues with the leaders discussing regional cooperation, economic growth and security. US President Donald Trump has marked key highlights at the ASEAN Summit in Kuala Lumpur. He met with Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, discussing trade relations and potential deals to benefit both countries. Brazil's foreign minister confirmed that the two leaders agreed to start a bilateral negotiation process, including discussions on tariff suspensions. On the sidelines of the summit, President Trump, in fact, presided over the signing of a ceasefire between Thailand and Cambodia. The agreement ends deadly border fighting that erupted in July, releases detained soldiers, and removes heavy weapons and landmines. Malaysian troops will monitor the border to ensure peace holds. Trump also signed trade deals with Thailand, Cambodia, and Malaysia, focusing on reducing trade barriers and boosting U.S. agricultural exports. This summit underscores renewed diplomacy and strategic engagement in Southeast Asia. Ross is still with us on the broadcast. Ross, of course, President Trump is making sure that foes turn into allies. There has been a considerable agreements that have been signed with Vietnam as well, and we all know the history between these two countries. Is this diplomatic outreach, or rather overreach, being done keeping the future in mind, or do you think this is business as usual?
That's a really interesting question, because on the one hand, there's a perception, and experts, scholars who look at Southeast Asia and its relations with the U.S., they often talk about how Southeast Asia struggles for attention from the United States government. And frankly, that's not a surprise given events over the past few decades. The U.S. has been heavily involved in the Middle East. There are other parts of the world that compete for attention, whether that's Ukraine or Africa or South America. But there's certainly a growing recognition of the reality that Southeast Asia is important, not only for competition with China, but also by itself. It's a large market. It's a market with a growing capability to export products to the United States, not just traditional industries, things like textiles or sneakers, but increasingly sophisticated products like semiconductors. And it's also an important market for U.S. investment. American companies are the leading investors in a number of Southeast Asian countries, and services exports like financial services or online services are also of growing importance for U.S. companies in Southeast Asia. But we could sign a bunch of trade agreements, and I'm speaking as an American. We could sign a bunch of agreements and have a nice summit, and it's great that President Trump is there in person. But what really is important is what is the follow-up, and will there continue to be a high level of engagement going forward? Will the leaders of Southeast Asian countries be welcome to the White House, for example? Will President Trump make another trip in the remaining 3+ years of his presidency, or is this the one and only time he'll come to the region? There's important questions about follow-up.
All right, Ross, always a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. All right, well, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reaffirmed that Israel alone will determine its own security policy and decide which international forces are acceptable within its borders. Let's listen in to what was said.
אתה יודע, בחודש האחרון אנחנו עדים לטענות מגוחכות ביחס ליחסים בין ארצות הברית וישראל. כשהייתי בוושינגטון נאמר שם שאני שולט בממשל האמריקני, אני מכתיב לו את המדיניות הביטחונית שלו. עכשיו טוענים את ההפך, הממשל האמריקני שולט בי והוא מכתיב את המדיניות הביטחונית של ישראל. לא זה נכון ולא זה נכון. ישראל היא מדינה עצמאית, ארצות הברית היא מדינה עצמאית, היחסים בינינו הם יחסים של שותפים. אנחנו שולטים בביטחון שלנו, ואנחנו גם הבהרנו שביחס לכוחות בינלאומיים, ישראל תקבע איזה כוחות אינם מקובלים עלינו, וכך אנחנו פועלים ונמשיך לפעול. זה כמובן מקובל גם על ארצות הברית, כפי שנציגי הבכירים ביותר הבהירו בימים האחרונים. ישראל היא מדינה עצמאית, אנחנו נגן על עצמנו בכוחות עצמנו, ואנחנו נמשיך לשלוט בגורלנו.
Well, he added that this stance has been acknowledged and supported by the United States, whose senior officials recently expressed agreement with Israel's approach. The comments come amid ongoing regional security discussions involving Israel's plans to annex the West Bank. Furthermore, the Israeli Prime Minister added that Israel alone will decide which countries it will allow to join a planned international security force in Gaza. Under a US-brokered ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, a coalition of mainly Arab and Muslim powers is expected to deploy troops in the devastated Palestinian territory. This is what Netanyahu stated.
המדיניות הביטחונית שלנו היא בידי ישראל. אנחנו לא מוכנים לסבול התקפות נגדנו, אנחנו מגיבים לפי שיקול דעתנו נגד התקפות, כפי שראינו גם בלבנון ולאחרונה גם בעזה. אנחנו נמטרנו 150 טון על החמאס ועל גורמי הטרור לאחר התקפה על שני חיילינו, וכמובן אנחנו גם מסכלים סכנות בהתהוותן עוד לפני שהן יוצאות אל הפועל, כפי שעשינו רק אתמול ברצועת עזה. איננו מבקשים אישור מאף אחד לכך.
All right, Mohammed Osman, International Affairs Specialist, is joining us from Cairo at this point in time. Mohammed, you heard what the Israeli Prime Minister had to say. What does this essentially mean? Is this, a different way of saying that, all right, the ceasefire is something that has been brokered, but according to Israel, there is still a threat. We will take our own decision. We may even violate the ceasefire. We may annex a part of Palestine if it does not align with our security perception. What do you make of what he said?
Thank you for having me, Vinay. Greetings to you and to your audience. It seems that the Israeli Prime Minister is trying to empty the concept of a ceasefire itself and the entire Sharm el-Sheikh agreement and even the Trump peace plan out of any actual meaning. It's trying to make it devoid of any aspects of durability and sustained calm in the Gaza Strip. It seems that Israel is treating this ceasefire as a temporary and necessary truce that has been imposed by the Americans for their own reasons, and they do believe that at a certain later stage, or at least they do hope, that they can resume the genocidal war against the civilian population of Gaza, or at least maintain the status quo where the Gaza Strip is basically torn apart, destroyed, obliterated, delay any and block even any efforts to reconstruct the Gaza Strip, and also to obstruct the implementation of many of the core provisions of this agreement, like, for example, delaying the deployment of international peacekeepers under the pretext of them vetoing the participation of certain countries. So now they don't want Turkey. The other day, maybe they will come up with another country that they do not wish to join the peacekeeping force. And also, Israel violates the ceasefire every few days, carrying out violent strikes against Palestinians. Just yesterday, they carried out an assassination of a Palestinian operative. So it doesn't seem that Israel is very committed to this agreement as things stand.
Mohammed, stay with us. In fact, Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich is calling for nationwide rallies to push for the annexation of the West Bank, urging supporters to mirror the activism of hostage families who campaign for the release of captives from Gaza. In a social media post, Smotrich said that regular demonstrations, symbols and public awareness campaigns could help convince US President Donald Trump to reconsider his stance, who recently warned Israel against annexation. The far-right minister described the move as a natural extension of Israel's sovereignty and said that determination like that shown in the hostage campaign could eventually shift American policy as well. Mohammed, what do you make of this? This is, of course, not only being supported by, the immediate members of Netanyahu's cabinet, but the people and the polity at large in Israel.
Honestly, it doesn't surprise me, Vinay, because Israel has always retained the goal of annexing the West Bank, and they have never abandoned this goal. Israel has been very clear. This government, especially the far-right members of this governing coalition, have been very eager and enthusiastic about the possibility of annexing the West Bank, or at least parts of the West Bank where there are Israeli settlements, which is a huge chunk of the West Bank, and they have been pushing for that for the past few years. And apparently they were about to take an actual measure on the ground to legally annex these. Of course, from their perspective, this is an illegal annexation according to international law if it ever happens, because Palestine is a state recognized by over 160 countries, despite it being occupied.
All right, Mohammed, appreciate you joining us. We've completely run out of time, but I appreciate your perspective. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. And that's all we have for now. Keep watching NewsX World for more news. Thank you.